Remember those forgotten desserts your black mama made after Sunday dinner? The ones that felt like home? Sweet pies, warm kitchens, and laughter that lingered longer than the meal itself. When did we stop saving room for that kind of love? Sweet potato pie was more than dessert. It was memory, family, and love baked into one flaky crust. The filling came from homegrown yams mashed smooth with sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and a touch of vanilla that made the whole house smell like comfort. Mamas baked it slow, never rushing a pie that carried so many Sundays within it. The crust browned at the edges, the filling firmed just enough, and the first slice always went to whoever had said grace. Some folks liked theirs plain, while others added whipped cream or a drizzle of syrup, but nobody argued about its place at the table. Sweet potato pie was the dessert that followed fried chicken and greens, a signal that the day's work and worship were done. Its warmth stayed long after the plates were cleared, sweet but grounded, like every lesson learned at the kitchen table. One bite could quiet a room, another could start a story. Sweet potato pie was proof that home did not come from a place. It came from taste, time, and hands that knew exactly how much love to fold in. Every family had their own version, but they all tasted like belonging, the kind that never left you hungry. Banana pudding with vanilla wafers was the crown jewel of Sunday desserts, cold and creamy with layers that meant patience. Mama would line the pan with golden wafers, spoon-thick vanilla custard over them, and tuck in sliced bananas so ripe they almost melted on sight. Then came another layer, and another, each one smoother than the last. It sat overnight in the fridge, firming just enough so that when the spoon hit, it gave a soft sigh of surrender. Some topped it with meringue, others with whipped cream, but everyone agreed it was best served chilled and quiet, with laughter somewhere nearby. Kids fought for the corner pieces where the wafers had gone soft and sweet, and elders got the first scoop for respect's sake. It was a dessert that spoke of care, measured, layered, and perfectly timed. No one rushed banana pudding. It was love that needed to set. Every family gathering ended the same way, with someone scraping the bowl for the last taste. It was simple food made sacred by routine, a Southern blessing turned ritual. Even now, one spoonful takes you right back to that crowded kitchen, full of stories, heat, and the sound of joy humming low like gospel. Peach cobbler with biscuit crust was the kind of dessert that announced itself before you ever saw it. The smell of bubbling peaches thickened with sugar, and butter floated through the air, wrapping around you like a hug after church. Mamas would drop spoonfuls of biscuit dough across the top, never too perfect, always just right. In the oven, it browned into golden peaks that cracked open to reveal syrup thick as honey. Served hot from the skillet, it hissed when the first spoon cut through, juices pooling under the crust. Vanilla ice cream on top was optional, but nobody ever said no. This was the dessert that could turn silence into praise and leftovers into legend. You could taste the sunshine in every bite, sweet from the fruit, warm from the oven, and rich from the hand that stirred it. Peach cobbler carried the spirit of summer even in winter, reminding everyone that joy was meant to be shared. It was messy, sticky, and absolutely perfect. Proof that flavor came from feeling, not fancy tools. The last bite always tasted like gratitude, the kind that lingers long after the bowl's been scraped clean. One spoonful, and the whole world slowed down. Buttermilk pound cake was the smell that pulled every child from the yard and every grown man from his nap. Dense, buttery, and baked golden in a bundt pan, it was the dessert that never needed frosting to impress. Mama would pour the batter thick and smooth, humming to herself as she scraped the bowl clean. The scent filled the whole house long before the timer rang, and by the time it came out, the crust had turned just crisp enough to flake under your fingers. The inside stayed moist, soft, and rich, melting on the tongue like memory itself. It was sliced thin for company, thick for family, and never served without a smile. No matter the occasion, Sunday supper, a homecoming, or a neighbor's visit, there was always room for pound cake. The sweetness was steady, never loud, and that was what made it special. It was love baked slow and simple, using what the pantry offered and nothing more. You did not need icing when your heart was already full. Every crumb tasted like care, and the smell lingered long after the plates were washed. Buttermilk pound cake was more than dessert. It was the promise that home was always warm. Bread pudding with raisins was a quiet masterpiece of thrift and tenderness. Nothing in Mama's kitchen ever went to waste, especially bread. Leftover loaves were torn into pieces, soaked in sweet milk, eggs, and butter, then baked until the top turned golden and the inside stayed soft as custard. Raisins gave it sweetness, cinnamon gave it soul, and the smell gave it away before anyone asked what was cooking. It was humble food made holy, transforming scraps into comfort that filled every corner of the room. Families gathered around the pan the moment it came out, spoons ready, patience gone. Sometimes a drizzle of syrup or cream finished it off, but it never needed help. Every bite was warm, spiced, and familiar, the taste of Sundays and second chances. Bread pudding was proof that grace could be baked from what others might throw away. It carried the lesson that love does not come from plenty but from purpose. Mama never measured. She just knew when it felt right. That instinct made it perfect every time. Even now, the thought of it softens hearts, reminding us that what's made with care lasts longer than any recipe written down. Caramel cake was the showstopper of every Sunday table, a golden beauty that looked like celebration and tasted like devotion. Mama would stand by the stove, stirring sugar and butter until it turned just the right shade of amber, never letting it burn. The caramel frosting had to be watched, whispered to, and poured at the perfect moment. Too soon, and it ran thin. Too late, and it stiffened like candy. But when she got it right, it draped over soft yellow layers like satin. The cake was tender, buttery, and rich enough to make conversation stop mid-sentence. Folks cut it carefully, as though it might disappear if handled wrong. The sweetness clung to your teeth, the flavor to your heart. Caramel cake was not just dessert. It was a skill, a tradition, a gift that proved patience could taste like perfection. It was the dessert everyone waited for and nobody refused. Long after the plates were empty, people still talked about that frosting, shiny as glass and sweet as memory. It was a labor of love and proof that the best things in life take time, attention, and a steady hand stirred by care. Lemon icebox pie was the cool sigh after a long Sunday meal, the kind of dessert that refreshed and revived all at once. It came together without fuss, just condensed milk, eggs, lemon juice, and a graham cracker crust pressed by hand. Mama mixed it smooth, poured it in, and let the fridge do the rest. No oven, no rush, just patience and chill. The pie set firm overnight, so by the next afternoon it sliced clean and gleamed like sunshine on a plate. Tart enough to wake you up, sweet enough to keep you coming back, it was balance made edible. The first bite hit sharp, then melted soft and silky. Folks would sneak spoonfuls before dinner, claiming to just test it, but everyone knew better. Lemon icebox pie was a reward for making it through another week, a sweet pause between the noise of living and the peace of resting. Its flavor stayed long after the last crumb was gone. That bright citrus tang reminded everyone that joy could be simple: a pie, a quiet moment, and someone to share it with. Cool, creamy, and endlessly comforting, it was the taste of Sunday's peace in every slice. Pineapple upside-down cake was pure Sunday sunshine baked in a skillet. Mama would melt butter and brown sugar first, letting it bubble just enough to coat the bottom before laying perfect golden rings of pineapple in place. A bright red cherry sat in the center of each ring, like jewels in a crown. The batter poured on top was thick and sweet, sealing the fruit in a sugary glaze that caramelized as it baked. When it flipped out of the pan, everyone held their breath until it landed, glistening, golden, and smelling like heaven. The cake was soft and airy, the fruit sticky and rich, a dance of sweet and tart that no one could resist. Served warm with a dollop of cream, it was the definition of show-stopping simplicity. You could taste the pride in every bite, proof that beauty could rise out of everyday things. Pineapple upside-down cake was more than dessert. It was an event. Families made it to celebrate, to impress, or simply to make Sunday feel extra sweet. The first slice always drew applause, the last one quiet sighs. It was the kind of dessert that made an ordinary meal feel like a moment worth remembering. Tea cakes were soft, simple, and unforgettable, baked more by instinct than instruction. They were somewhere between a cookie and a biscuit, sweet enough to please but plain enough to last all week in a tin. Mama mixed sugar, flour, eggs, and a touch of vanilla without ever measuring a thing. Her hands knew the dough by feel, pressing it into rounds that baked just until the edges turned golden. The smell filled the whole house, warm and welcoming as a hymn. Tea cakes were for visitors, for after-church coffee, or just to hush a sweet tooth after dinner. They were everyday treats made special by tradition. Kids would sneak them from the cooling rack, leaving crumb trails across the kitchen floor. No one scolded. They were meant to be shared. Every family had its own version, passed down in stories rather than recipes. The taste was light, buttery, and familiar, like love you did not have to think about. Tea cakes were comfort in cookie form, simple and pure. They reminded everyone that sweetness does not always shout. It whispers, waits, and lingers just long enough to make you smile. Chocolate mayonnaise cake was the dessert that turned thrift into pure genius. Born from lean times, it replaced milk and butter with mayonnaise, adding moisture that made every bite rich and velvety. Mama would mix cocoa and sugar into the batter until it looked like silk, then pour it into pans that smelled faintly of Sunday roast. The cake rose dark and even, its texture soft as a secret. Once cooled, it got topped with thick fudge frosting, whipped by hand, shiny enough to catch the light. Nobody believed mayonnaise could make something taste that good, but one bite erased all doubt. The flavor was deep, not too sweet, with a smoothness that made you close your eyes for just a second longer. Chocolate mayonnaise cake reminded folks that creativity could taste better than luxury. It was humble, clever, and downright delicious, a symbol of how resourceful hands could turn anything into something worth celebrating. Served after Sunday dinner, it always disappeared before the coffee cooled. Every crumb carried history, heart, and a reminder that love, like good cake, needs no fancy ingredients, just faith in what you have and a reason to share it. Coconut layer cake was the grand finale of any Sunday spread, tall and proud with frosting as white as a new tablecloth. Mama cracked coconuts by hand, saving every drop of milk and shaving the meat fine with patience born of love. The layers were soft and buttery, each one stacked carefully, then covered in billows of sweet icing that clung like snow. Every forkful carried a tender sweetness, rich but never heavy, with the faint crunch of fresh coconut catching the light. It was a cake made for special days, Easter, homecomings, or when company came calling. You could taste the care in every bite, the kind that took all afternoon but felt worth every minute. Children waited by the counter for stray flakes to fall, while grown folks admired the cake like art before slicing. It was the kind of dessert that silenced a table, not out of manners but awe. Coconut layer cake was not just food, it was ceremony, celebration, and memory covered in white. Even days later, the leftovers stayed moist, the frosting soft and forgiving. A slice of it could turn any Sunday into something sacred, proof that beauty could come from nothing more than butter, sugar, and heart. Chess pie was the kind of dessert that whispered simplicity and sang sweetness. It came from a time when cupboards were nearly bare, but love was not. Eggs, sugar, butter, and a bit of cornmeal made magic together, baking into a golden custard that firmed just enough to hold its shape. The crust flaked beneath your fork, the filling melted on your tongue, and the taste lingered long after the last bite. Mama made it when there was no fruit, no cream, no fuss, just the promise of something warm to end the meal. The top would brown just right, with tiny bubbles that caught the light like amber glass. Some said it got its name because folks would ask, "What kind of pie is this?" And Mama would smile and say, "Just pie." But everyone knew there was nothing just about it. It was the flavor of thrift turned tender, sweetness drawn from almost nothing. Chess pie taught patience, balance, and the art of making ordinary things extraordinary. It did not need decoration, just a clean plate and a quiet moment. Each bite was a reminder that love does not need luxury to shine. It only needs a reason to share. Apple Brown Betty was the kind of dessert that made a home feel lived in. Tart apples were sliced thin, tossed with brown sugar, cinnamon, and a squeeze of lemon, then layered between buttery crumbs. As it baked, the apples softened and the sugar turned syrupy, seeping into every crumble until it all became one sweet, bubbling whole. The smell alone could draw neighbors from across the yard. Mama served it warm, sometimes with cream poured over the top or a scoop of melting ice cream when there was a little extra to go around. It was not fancy, but it was honest, a recipe built on what was on hand and what was loved. Every bite was a balance of soft fruit and crisp topping. Simple ingredients turned into something tender and true. Apple Brown Betty belonged to families who understood that comfort did not need perfection. It was for evenings when the light turned soft, the table was full, and the world outside could wait. No one wrote down the recipe. It lived in memory and feel. That was its beauty, born of instinct, sustained by love. It was sweetness done right, the kind that lingered long after the dishes were cleared. Old-fashioned jelly roll was dessert-turned performance, a swirl of care baked into every slice. The sponge cake had to be thin, soft, and baked just long enough to hold without cracking. Mama spread a layer of fruit preserves, strawberry, peach, or sometimes homemade blackberry, then rolled it tight while still warm. A dusting of powdered sugar finished it off, white as a light snowfall. When sliced, each round showed perfect spirals of color and cake, the kind that made guests lean closer just to admire the work. It looked delicate, but it was made strong, like the women who baked it. Jelly roll was the dessert that proved patience and precision could live side by side with joy. Every bite was soft and sweet, the tartness of fruit cutting through the sugar just enough. Children waited for the ends, where the filling overflowed and the shape loosened. The rest was served proudly, a centerpiece born from steady hands and time well spent. It was dessert as tradition, meant to be admired before eaten. A jelly roll said, "We may not have much, but what we do have we make beautiful." And it always was, humble, pretty, and filled with love. Molasses stack cake was a mountain of patience baked into layers. Each thin round was pressed flat by hand, then baked until firm enough to hold but soft enough to bend. Between them went thick apple butter, spiced with cinnamon and cloves, spread edge to edge like sealing a promise. Once stacked high, it rested overnight, the molasses cake soaking up every drop of sweetness until the whole thing softened into harmony. By morning, it sliced like velvet, the knife gliding through layers rich as memory. This was a dessert for celebrations, weddings, and holidays, one that took both time and love to get right. Families guarded their recipes like secrets, each with its own twist of spice or syrup. Molasses stack cake carried the taste of the mountains and the story of the hands that made it. The smell was dark and deep, a mix of sugar and smoke that filled the room with warmth. One slice was enough to feed a memory, two could feed a conversation. No frosting, no fuss, just layers of care built one atop another. It was slow dessert for slow living, a sweet reminder that some things are meant to take their time. Coconut cream pie was the taste of Sunday sunshine in a crust. Mama cooked the filling from scratch. Milk, eggs, sugar, and shredded coconut stirred until thick and glossy. The smell rose sweet and soft, like summer caught in a saucepan. She poured it into a flaky crust, still warm from the oven, and let it cool under a clean towel. The top was crowned with whipped cream and toasted coconut flakes that crunched like joy between your teeth. It looked too pretty to eat, but tasted too good to resist. Each bite was smooth, cool, and buttery with just a hint of salt from the crust. Coconut cream pie had a way of silencing the table, the kind of dessert that left only smiles. It was often saved for special guests or holidays, a signal that love had been poured into every step. Even the leftovers never lasted long. Someone always found an excuse for another slice, It was old-fashioned elegance born from humble ingredients. That first forkful melted slow, sweet, and sure, a moment you never rushed. Coconut cream pie proved that some of life's best rewards are meant to be savored, not hurried. Shoe-fly pie was molasses magic baked into a crust, a dessert from lean times that tasted rich all the same. Mama mixed dark syrup with sugar, butter, and crumbs until it bubbled thick as toffee. The topping baked into golden pebbles that crunched over the soft filling, like sweetness wearing armor. When it came out of the oven, the whole house smelled like earth and sugar, the kind of scent that felt both old and warm. Shoe-fly pie was sticky, sweet, and just a little smoky, a flavor that stayed long after the dishes were cleared. It was born from necessity, but became something beautiful, proof that hard times could still taste good. Every slice glistened like amber and pulled at your fork with a soft, chewy tug. Folks said its name came from having to shoo away flies drawn to its sweetness, but nobody minded. It was worth the wait. Served with coffee or milk, it was comfort that never aged. The pie reminded families that survival could be sweet too, that making do could feel like triumph. Shoe-fly pie was more than dessert. It was history you could taste, baked slow and served with pride. Peach hand pies were the grab-and-go treasures of southern kitchens. Mama filled circles of dough with sticky peaches or apple butter, folded them over, and sealed the edges with the back of a fork. They were fried until golden, the fruit bubbling inside, then laid to cool on brown paper that soaked up the extra oil. The smell could stop a child in their tracks. Each pie was small enough for one hand, but big enough to fill an afternoon hunger. They were treats for picnics, church socials, or long car rides on summer Sundays. The crust snapped between your teeth, giving way to warm, syrupy filling that stained your fingers sweet. Kids lined up for them before dinner, trying not to get caught. Some families dusted them with sugar, others dipped them in syrup or honey. No two tasted quite the same, but all shared the same joy. Peach hand pies were freedom disguised as dessert, portable, personal, and perfectly Southern. They tasted of sunshine and home, made from what was ripe and ready. They were proof that love could fit in your hand, warm enough to carry and sweet enough to remember. Pecan pralines were little miracles of sugar and patience. Mama would stand by the stove with a wooden spoon, stirring cream, sugar, and butter until the mixture thickened and pulled away from the pot. Timing was everything. 1 second too soon and they stayed soft, 1 second too late and they turned to rocks. When the mixture hit just right, she spooned it onto wax paper, the pecans glistening under their sugary coats. The air filled with the smell of toasted nuts and caramelized sweetness. Children hovered nearby, waiting for the candy to cool enough to steal. Each praline was crisp on the outside, creamy inside, sweet with a hint of salt. They were made for Christmas, for Sunday after church, or for no reason at all. They were rewards for good manners, tokens of love, and bites of home. Pecan pralines melted slow on the tongue, leaving behind warmth and wonder. Every batch was a gamble and a triumph, a test of instinct and care. The process was hard, but the joy was easy. In one small piece of candy lived every sweet thing about home, wrapped in sugar and memory. 7-Up pound cake was the bright twist that turned a classic into something modern and fun. Mama poured lemon-lime soda straight from the bottle into her mixing bowl, trusting the fizz to do its work. The carbonation made the batter light and airy, while the soda's sweetness added a subtle tang. Baked in a bundt pan, the cake rose high and golden, smelling like sunshine and laughter. When sliced, it revealed a soft, buttery crumb that almost glowed. Some topped it with a drizzle of lemon glaze, others left it plain, letting its quiet sparkle shine. It was the taste of change in a world still clinging to tradition, a little store-bought magic mixed with homemade pride. Children loved the novelty of it, watching bubbles in the bowl and asking for the soda cake. 7-Up pound cake brought joy to the table without trying too hard. It was simple, fresh, and cheerful, like a summer afternoon turned edible. Every bite carried sweetness and nostalgia in equal measure, proving that even the humblest experiment could become a new classic. It was the dessert that taught everyone that joy, once discovered, should always rise. Butterscotch pudding was the kind of dessert that required both patience and stirring. Mama would stand at the stove with a wooden spoon, whisking milk, butter, and brown sugar until it thickened to a glossy gold. The scent of caramel filled the kitchen, warm and cozy as a quilt. When it was ready, she poured it into glass bowls or jelly jars to cool, each portion gleaming like sunshine. Served chilled or just barely warm, it slid smooth on the tongue, sweet but never too much. The flavor was deep, buttery, and old-fashioned. Simple enough for any night, but special enough for Sunday. A sprinkle of sugar on top gave it a delicate crust, the perfect finish to a meal that lingered in memory. Butterscotch pudding proved that comfort could come from the simplest ingredients if made with care. It was home in spoonful form, creamy, golden, and unforgettable. Blackberry cobbler was wild sweetness tamed by love and a hot oven. Children gathered the berries from fence lines and ditches, their fingers stained purple by the time the bowls were full. Mama would toss them with sugar, then pour them into a pan and top them with biscuit dough or pie crust, depending on her mood. As it baked, the berries bubbled up through the cracks, their syrup thick and fragrant. The smell was pure summer, filling the whole house before supper even started. When it came out, no one could wait for it to cool. Served warm with cream or ice cream, it was tart, juicy, and perfect in every way. Blackberry cobbler turned chores into celebration, the reward for scratches and sunburns earned that afternoon. Every spoonful tasted of sunlight, sweat, and satisfaction. It was the flavor of southern summer, sticky, sweet, and meant to be shared. Oatmeal pie was proof that creativity could sweeten scarcity. When pecans were too costly, Mama used oats instead, stirring them into a syrupy filling of butter, sugar, and eggs. As it baked, the oats floated up and toasted, forming a golden, chewy crust that crackled softly under a fork. The inside stayed gooey, warm, and sweet, with a flavor that felt both familiar and new. It smelled like breakfast, but tasted like dessert, a perfect trick born from necessity. Oatmeal pie sat proudly on Sunday tables, no apologies needed. Each slice tasted like gratitude and grit, sweet reminders that good things can come from doing your best with what you have. Served plain or with whipped cream, it never disappointed. Oatmeal pie was the taste of perseverance baked golden brown, a dessert that carried pride in every bite. Vinegar pie was the surprise dessert that always made people raise an eyebrow until they tasted it. It was born from empty cupboards when lemons were gone and life demanded invention. Mama whisked sugar, butter, eggs, and just a spoonful of vinegar into a smooth custard that baked to golden perfection. The vinegar gave it a tart brightness, balancing the sweetness without giving away its secret. The first bite was pure wonder, silky, tangy, and light as air. It became a favorite not for its ingredients, but for its heart. Vinegar pie reminded families that even hard times could taste good with enough care and courage. It was a lesson in resilience disguised as dessert, elegant in its simplicity and proud in its honesty. The smell, faintly buttery and sweet, lingered long after supper ended. It was the flavor of making do and somehow making magic too. Hummingbird cake was joy baked in layers. The batter was thick with mashed bananas, crushed pineapple, and chopped pecans, spiced just right and baked until golden. The frosting, rich cream cheese whipped smooth, was spread thick and even, sealing in every bit of sweetness. It looked like celebration and tasted like homecoming. Moist, fruity, and faintly tangy, it was the kind of dessert you never forgot. Mama made it for holidays, church socials, and birthdays, each time claiming it was just something simple. But everyone knew it was her masterpiece. The smell filled the house with warmth and the promise of laughter. Every bite blended sunshine fruit with spice and love. Hummingbird cake was Southern pride on a plate, a recipe passed through hearts, not hands. It proved sweetness could have depth, and joy could have flavor. Ash-cooked sweet potatoes were a simple yet unforgettable treat. Whole sweet potatoes were nestled directly into the hot ashes of a wood-burning fireplace or outdoor fire pit, slowly roasting until their skins blackened and their insides caramelized. The result was a soft, smoky sweetness that needed no sugar or butter to shine. In African American households, especially in rural areas without modern ovens, this method was both practical and flavorful. The smell of roasting sweet potatoes would fill the air, drawing children and adults alike to the hearth. Once cooked, they could be split open and eaten right from the skin, often as a snack on cold evenings. This was food tied to patience and tradition, a reminder that sometimes the simplest preparations yield the richest flavors. Today, with most cooking moved indoors and convenience foods replacing old methods, ash-cooked sweet potatoes are rarely made, but for those who tasted them, they remain unmatched. Where bananas, pineapple, and warm spices met in a towering creation crowned with cream cheese frosting. Mashed ripe bananas and crushed pineapple gave the batter moisture and gentle sweetness, while cinnamon added a soft heat. Chopped pecans folded through the mix brought welcome crunch. Baked in layers and cooled, the cake was frosted with rich cream cheese icing that clung to every curve. Each slice revealed flecks of fruit and nuts, offering a tropical aroma that felt both festive and comforting. This cake graced wedding receptions, church anniversaries, and milestone birthdays throughout the 1970s, admired for its bold flavor and dramatic presentation. Families cherished it as a special occasion dessert that celebrated abundance and creativity. Hummingbird cake embodied the generous spirit of Southern hospitality, proving that fruit, spice, and a careful hand could produce a showpiece worthy of the grandest table while still carrying the warmth of a lovingly baked homemade treat. Maypop fruit mash turned the wild passion fruit of the American South into a rare dessert filled with tropical fragrance. Known as maypop for the sound of its hollow fruit when stepped on, this native vine produced aromatic yellow fruits that ripened in late summer. Enslaved foragers gathered the fruit, split the rinds, and scooped the bright pulp into a bowl with a drizzle of molasses or honey when such sweeteners were at hand. The result was a naturally tangy treat that needed no cooking and provided a burst of vitamins. The flavor, a cross between citrus and melon, delighted anyone lucky enough to taste it. Even after emancipation, rural families prized maypops for jellies and pies, and the plant remains a cherished wild edible across the Southeast. Maypop fruit mash preserves a memory of fleeting seasonal abundance and the creativity that transformed wild gifts into moments of celebration, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, people found ways to enjoy the bright, unique flavors offered freely by the natural world. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Ham bone soup with vegetables was one of those meals where one piece of meat flavored an entire pot. A single ham bone, stripped of most of its meat, simmered for hours with onions, carrots, and potatoes until the broth turned rich and smoky. My grandmother would add beans or greens if she had them, letting the flavors meld into something far more substantial than the ingredients suggested. Families gathered around steaming bowls, dipping bread into the broth and savoring the flavor the bone had left behind. It was frugal cooking at its finest, taking scraps and stretching them into nourishment. The soup fed many mouths, warmed cold nights, and made do with what was available. In the 1960s, when meat was costly, a ham bone could be the centerpiece of dinner, proving that thrift and patience could coax flavor out of nearly anything. Ham bone soup with vegetables carried both practicality and comfort in every ladleful. Fatback fried cabbage was a simple, deeply satisfying dish that turned a humble head of cabbage into a flavorful side worth remembering. Fatback, a cured slab of pork fat with a rich, salty taste, was diced and fried until it released its golden drippings. Into this savory base went shredded cabbage, sizzling as it hit the hot pan and slowly softening while soaking up all the flavor. The edges browned slightly, giving a hint of caramelization, while the tender leaves carried the smoky richness of the pork. This was a dish that needed no complicated seasoning, just salt, pepper, and sometimes a splash of vinegar to brighten the flavors. In African American kitchens, especially in the rural South, fatback fried cabbage was an easy way to feed a family, served alongside cornbread and beans or as part of a larger spread. It represented the practice of using every part of what was available, from the vegetables in the garden to the trimmings from a butchered hog. Today, while cabbage is still common, the tradition of frying it in fatback has faded, replaced by lighter cooking methods, but its flavor remains unforgettable to those who grew up eating it. Chilled showstopper of warm weather socials, a snowy white vision that cooled the hottest summer evenings. A light sponge cake baked in a large rectangular pan provided the base, while a creamy coconut frosting made with evaporated milk and sweetened shredded coconut blanketed the top like fresh snow. After chilling, the cake absorbed the frosting's rich flavor, turning each bite into a tender tropical treat. Served in generous squares at backyard picnics or family reunions, it delivered sweetness without heaviness, perfect after barbecue or spicy foods. Guests admired the way the coconut caught the light, sparkling like tiny crystals as the cake was sliced. In African American households of the 1970s, coconut sheet cake became a seasonal favorite that signaled celebration and hospitality. Its simplicity and ability to feed a crowd made it a practical choice, while its striking appearance ensured it was remembered long after the last square disappeared from the platter. Lemon chess pie shone with bright flavor. Roasted gourd seeds turned the remnants of pumpkins and native gourds into a vital source of fat and minerals. After the flesh was cooked for soups or pies, seeds were washed, lightly salted, and spread near the hearth to dry before roasting. This simple preparation produced a crunchy, nutrient-rich snack that stored well through the winter and could be ground into meal or used to thicken stews. Similar seed roasting traditions existed across West Africa, where pumpkin and melon seeds were prized for both flavor and nutrition, and those techniques crossed the Atlantic with enslaved people. Over time, roasted pumpkin seeds became a familiar autumn treat in American households, sold at fairs and enjoyed during harvest celebrations. The practice illustrates how African culinary memory merged with indigenous crops, creating a food that moved from necessity to seasonal pleasure. Roasted gourd seeds continue to appear in modern kitchens and farmers markets, carrying with them the history of careful saving and the resourceful spirit that turned every part of the plant into nourishment. Buttermilk cornbread baked in cast iron anchored countless suppers with its golden crust and tangy bite. The heavy skillet, seasoned from years of use, gave the bread a flavor impossible to match in a modern pan. Families stirred cornmeal with fresh buttermilk, a little lard, and a pinch of salt, then listened for the satisfying hiss as the batter hit hot iron. The result was a loaf both crisp at the edges and tender inside, perfect for soaking up potlikker from simmered greens or for eating plain with a drizzle of cane syrup. Grandmothers often taught their grandchildren to test the heat of the skillet by flicking in a few drops of water, a small ritual that connected generations. On Sundays after church, the scent of baking cornbread drifted through neighborhoods, promising a meal that united family and friends. Today, prepackaged mixes and quick breads have replaced the slow, careful method that once defined African American kitchens, and the art of true cast iron cornbread grows rarer with each passing year. Pork crackling cornbread was a dish that made even a simple pan of bread feel like a celebration. Cracklins, small crispy bits left from rendering pork fat, were cheap to come by and packed with flavor. My grandmother folded them into cornbread batter, the fat melting and the crunchy pieces scattering through every slice. Baked until golden, it came out hearty and rich, with texture that plain cornbread never had. The salty pork balanced the sweet cornmeal, making each bite feel indulgent even though the ingredients were inexpensive. Families sliced it thick and ate it alone or alongside beans, greens, or stews, letting the cracklins carry the flavor of meat through the whole meal. In the 1960s, this kind of dish made families feel proud, as though they had something special on the table despite the hardships around them. Pork cracklin cornbread was thrift turned into joy, simple food lifted by the spirit of making do. Hoe cakes were more than just cornmeal pancakes. They were a connection to labor, history, and home. Made from a simple batter of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, they were cooked on flat iron griddles, skillets, or even the flat side of a hoe blade over an open fire. This made them quick to prepare in the fields or at home, perfect for feeding hungry workers. Hoe cakes had a crisp edge, soft center, and a flavor that paired well with everything from syrup to savory stews. In African American history, they represented sustenance during long days and ingenuity in cooking methods. They could be eaten for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, depending on what was available to serve alongside them. While modern kitchens have replaced open fires, the memory of hoe cakes remains tied to family stories and community meals. Their simplicity made them timeless, yet their presence on tables today is far less common than it once was. Molasses spice cookies carried the deep flavors of Gullah and Low Country tradition into modern kitchens, each chewy bite echoing centuries of coastal heritage. Dark molasses blended with brown sugar to create a dough rich with warmth, while cinnamon, ginger, and cloves filled the air as the cookies baked. Rolled in coarse sugar before hitting the oven, they emerged crackled and fragrant, their centers soft and slightly sticky. The taste balanced sweet and spicy with a lingering note of caramel that made them irresistible alongside a glass of cold milk or a cup of tea. In the 1970s, these cookies connected generations, offering a tangible link to the flavors of ancestors who baked with what the land and sea provided. Families shared them during holiday gatherings or quiet evenings alike, savoring the way tradition lived on in every spice-filled bite. Molasses spice cookies proved that a simple treat can carry profound meaning, turning an ordinary snack into a celebration of history, memory, and enduring sweetness. Sweet sheep sorrel soup brought a welcome spark of bright flavor after months of heavy grains and salted meat scraps. This common wild plant, with its arrow-shaped leaves and natural lemony tang, grew freely in meadows and along woodland edges. Enslaved gatherers picked the young leaves early in spring, rinsed them well, and simmered them with water and a handful of onions or garlic if available. The result was a light, refreshing broth rich in vitamin C and a gentle tartness that awakened tired palates. African culinary traditions often prized sour greens, and this soup reflected that taste while also serving an important nutritional role in preventing scurvy. After emancipation, sheep sorrel remained a favorite wild green in many rural communities, used in teas and simple soups that celebrated the arrival of warmer weather. Today, foragers still seek it for its tangy bite and health benefits. Sheep sorrel soup stands as a quiet example of how careful observation of the land turned common weeds into an enduring part of Southern culinary heritage. Okra fritters, also known as okra cakes, offered crisp, golden edges and a tender interior that celebrated the summer garden. Fresh okra pods were chopped fine, mixed with cornmeal, onions, and a dash of pepper, then spooned into hot oil until each patty puffed and browned. Sold at fish fries, church picnics, and traveling fairs, these fritters were easy to eat by hand and full of flavor that tied African heritage to Southern soil. The okra gave a subtle sweetness and a soft binding that kept the patties moist while the cornmeal crust provided satisfying crunch. Children waited impatiently beside bubbling skillets, hoping for the first fritter to cool enough to taste. Vendors wrapped them in newspaper cones so families could stroll through evening air scented with music and spice. Modern snack foods have replaced these handcrafted treats, but those who remember the sound of oil popping and the taste of garden-fresh okra know the fritters carried more than flavor. They held the joy of gathering and the pride of turning humble crops into a festival of taste. Stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a dish that blended frugality with comfort in a way that stuck with families for decades. Okra, often grown in backyard gardens, went into a simmering pot with onions, tomatoes, and broth until it softened into a thick stew. My grandmother would mix simple cornmeal batter, drop spoonfuls into the bubbling pot, and let the dumplings cook until they puffed into tender bites. The texture of the okra thickened the stew naturally, giving it body without needing flour or cream. Each bowl carried the flavor of the garden, earthy and sustaining, with dumplings that filled the stomachs of tired workers. It was food that came straight from the soil and stretched further than its ingredients suggested. Children grew up eating this dish as a matter of routine, yet it became part of the rhythm of survival. In the 1960s, stewed okra with cornmeal dumplings was a staple that represented both thrift and ingenuity, turning humble vegetables and flour into something worthy of pride at the dinner table. Got a sweet memory or favorite Sunday dessert? Drop it in the comments, hit that like button like it owes you pie, and subscribe for more soul food stories served warm.